Describing what's problematic with my career mostly was personality trouble, egos and such. I'm going to put my phone away so I don't forget. This one's going to be a lot shorter because, well, there's no way to describe it otherwise. And you say, well, if it's going to be shorter, then that means there's not much good about your career. Well, actually, it's the opposite. Some of the things that came out good about the career was the first thing was honesty. It drove people wild, but at the same time, they weren't questioning me later. The second one is I showed up. The most often, I was the one guy in the shop that would show up almost every day of the week unless I was honestly sick. One of the detriments was if you had sick days because of my sinuses, lung trouble, and other health problems, that if they gave you 5 sick days a year, I used 5 sick days a year and quite often worked into my vacation as part of my sick days, which angered some of the companies. You need time off. I'm getting time off. So that's another one. But honesty of the situation, integrity about it, that just like I was saying before, if you're honest about something and everything you do backs it up, then you get fewer questions even when the ego hits and they don't like you. Well, it still works. So honesty, integrity, forthright. When I say it to the one thing to the customer, it's the same thing that comes back to the shop. There was only one time in my career that I remember that I shaved something where I didn't lie to the customer. In fact, I was completely honest on one hand, but didn't tell him the specifics on the other because he wouldn't understand to begin with. But what I told him was, and it was a job that I had done on an Oliver 2255, and they have an 8-foot long PTO shaft. And I pulled the PTO out, and something sounded funny, but I was like, well, I must have hit something on the way out. Pulled the shaft out, took the PTO out, reworked the PTOs, put it all back up, and stuck it in there. Checked the PTO, everything was working beautiful. So that's what I was there for. Got the pressure set, the PTO turning right, I'm going home. Well, it took a while to get the oil in and out, that's for sure. But later on, the customer calls and says, you can't shift. So what do you mean? It was stuck in 1 or 2 gears, and that's it. So they got out on the truck and brought it down. What did I tell the customer? When he called and said, what is it? And I said, well, let's just say, Carl, we got to tear it apart, and it's something that it's a good thing it happened now. There's no way to know because it was up in your tractor 3 feet into the transmission. And I said, they said, well, you caused it when you did the PTO. And I said, no, it was already there. I said, if what happened now is a bent shift fork. I said, if it didn't happen now, the entire input shaft of your transmission would have come unglued in your tractor and possibly taken gears and housing out. What do you mean? I said, the nut that retains your transmission input shaft bearings had fallen off the back. And the only thing it ended up doing was after the PTO, you went to move, and the nut fell down in there and bent the shift fork, and that's all it did. So if you can imagine 150 horsepower tearing through that little shaft, he says that could have been a lot of damage. So that was one of the things here that when I talk about what were the best points of my career, that was one of them that was actually a stellar moment in my career, where I was able to protect my employer. I was able to protect the customer as well. And when we got done with the job and he understood what had actually happened, and we showed him this was down in there and showed him the shift fork, showed him the pieces, and he almost turned white. And he says, what would that have cost? He says, your tractor would have been done. And the customer was happy with that. So 12255 Oliver ended up with some big repairs and a happy customer and a happy employer. He looked at me and said, how did you describe it? And I told him that if it hadn't happened this way, he would have lost his tractor. And he says, that's very good. You were honest, but didn't tell him the whole story. And I said, no, because what are you going to do? You pull a PTO shaft out? I don't know what happened up in there. Neither does he. So when we got done with it, he was so happy that a couple of years later, he bought another brand spanking new white workhorse tractor, 185. There were only 3 in the nation, and only 1 was released for sale. We had it. And I was part of the crew to put that tractor together. Essentially, that's history, but it doesn't mean much. So the honesty and integrity added up with a situation that could have been a lawsuit because he wasn't real thrilled with the current owners of the company at the time. So you can work your way out by being honest because they can't come back on you. What'd you say? You didn't lie to them, you didn't cheat to them, and there's nothing for a lawyer to play with. What's another one? The other one was I love tech and I love studying apart from the job that I was doing. I'd go online, I'd be reading books, I'd be doing some work at home. Nope, not a farmer. It's a 45-year technician from Cobleskill, SUNY Cobleskill, 1980. BOCES before that here in New York. From essentially, I've been turning wrenches and playing in technical stuff since 76 when I was 16. So out on the road, there were many things like that that happened. That honest with the customer, come back to the shop, and there was one egotistical boss that would go off, and I said, I can explain to you all day long. If you don't understand, there's nothing I can do for you. And he'd get angry, and then his father-in-law would come in, the original owner of the company, and say, "You're too stupid. Shut up and listen." So when I wrote the work order up and he went and checked the service book and everything lined up, then he would quiet down. So that's one of the better things that I did in my career. Communication wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem with honesty, integrity, or being forthright with what had to be. But sometimes they didn't want to hear it. In fact, often they didn't want to hear it. They want to hear, "No problem, everything's fine." That's what they want to hear until everything hits the fan and it's not. Another one was I tried to keep tooled up with the tools that were necessary for the job. And the problem I had was too many tools often. But then again, I couldn't afford that many. So over the years, I kept stacking up stuff until finally I retire here and I've got almost 3 complete sets of tools. One that I take to the field when I go out to work on my own stuff, getting firewood, stuff in the shop. And then I used to have 2 shops when I was self-unemployed for 10 years, and plus what I had in the shop where I was working. So I got a mess of tools. But I was properly prepared. I had spares. That was another one. And that's hard to do when you're new, young in your career. But the idea is that people used to buy the cheaper tools from Harbor Fake or Sears or Napa or anywhere else, find out what did or didn't work, and then after that, a lot of them would trade it in. And back then, you trade them in. Now they won't even bother to take the trade in because the stuff's too cheap and nobody will buy it. They're on the Mac or Snap-on or Matco tool trucks or Cornwell and some other parts of the country for a reason. And sometimes you get an independent tool guy. They're the best. But at the same time, taking trade-ins, don't waste your time. Keep your old tools. Why? That's the weldable, bendable stuff. Nobody taught me that to begin with. Not even guys that should have known better. Technical stuff, I enjoyed it. When a new car came out with catalytic converters, a new type of fuel injection, a new type of variable Venturi carburetor that Ford had for several years, and LTDs and Crown Vics and Mercury Marquis that was like this far from fuel injection, it was like, cool, I had to know. When the codes were coming out in the newer engines, there was a $25 beeper box. I bought one, tried to learn about codes in the cars. Next thing you know, I'm employed by Cummins in Albany, and I'm running through diagnostics of things and interpreting the information and coming up with things where there were 10 codes that all came down to a problem with oil pressure. I picked up the diagnostics being a first-year guy at Cummins in my late 30s. And then that won me quite a bit of gravitas, so to speak, back then. But it was one of those things where one shift sat there and said, well, either he's right or wrong. And I found out the shift manager didn't necessarily like me. He was tired of it, thought I got something too easy in the union, too much pay, too much, pat on the back, too far up. Started rather than a level 5 or 4, I was at 3 in the shop, the 3rd grade. And then they finally figured out why after a while. So those are things. I was also willing to work on other stuff to learn. There was an excavator that came in. Everybody wanted to pull the engine. And they come up and looked at me and said, we need a rear main seal in there. I said, okay. What do you mean, okay? You're going to pull the engine? No, why would I do that? Take the hydraulic pump off the back. You might not even have to take all the pieces off. Mark the hoses, take them off, pull the pump back, do your seal, put it back in. There's no clutch there or anything. How hard can it be? Then I found out later on that the younger union guys were angry that they only worked on Cummins. And the young union, because they made a big enough stink that the union boss himself in the shop there, the steward, there wasn't much he could do about it because they go over his head and they knew it. And that was a problem in the union system. If it was something they could make hay over, the big chiefs would come down and make hay. Other than that, they'd tell you to shut up and get in line. So I got quite a few jobs that way that nobody else would bother because that was beneath them. There was a lot like that. And if I made a mistake, okay, I made a mistake. Then we'll do it next time. One of them was a simple mistake. N14 needed plates on the heads on the fuel systems. All three heads are the same on an N14, but they have jumpers and they have block plates on the end. Supposedly, I missed a block off plate. And the one guy said he made a big scene about it and tore everything all apart and did this, did that, and put it all back in. He says he could have done it in 5 minutes just reaching through the slots of the fan. He says, we all make that mistake. He just happened to make the mistake of making your mistake bigger than it needed to be. And I said, if that's all you did wrong. So I actually got off pretty good about that. There was a few other things. Going to service schools, that wasn't a problem. The only problem I came to later as I was older was how much time off am I taking for service schools and what are you paying me? What do you mean? You're getting service school free. No, what are you paying me? Do I have to drive there on my own nickel? There's quite a few things that made service schools, how can we say it, A, unavoidable on one hand, and B, on the other hand, I was a nightmare as far as you decided you're not paying me for some reason. You don't have the right receipt. You don't have the right this. You don't have the right that. Oh, no. You sent me away from my family for 1 or 2 weeks, and this is what you do to me? I was the wrong employee for that. But at the same time, when I got done and handed in my paperwork, I was done and I handed in my paperwork. It was over. There wasn't a problem with it. So, in honesty, worked quite a few times after that, working up that I had a problem with a gasket. I was analytical. I said, something's wrong here. And they said, what do you mean? There was an ISB 4-valve Cummins and there was a 2-valve Cummins. The timing cover was different on the two. And the gaskets were different. The original B 2-valve, 12-valve as they like to call it, they put the wrong gasket on the aluminum front cover, but they were too proud to actually have it made because apparently they had 1 million of them made. And they were coming from the factory with the wrong gasket that would hold up if there was no accessory on that cover. None. I mean, couldn't even have a simple pump, and sometimes it would fail even with just the injection pump if the tail bracket came off. So it was problematic, and I found out that the 24 valve had a different gasket that fit better. And I got myself out of a jam by putting the 24 valve gasket in there because I'd done one engine and another and said it looks different, made the comparison, and was able to start putting those in when other people were arguing with me in the parts department. That's not the right gasket. And I said, I'm telling you, you don't tell me. But because of the integrity of the situation, even a manager that wasn't, he started a bad argument. Fact is, he almost got fired over it. We got into an argument and he wasn't thrilled because he lost so bad. He came out and said, what is it? And I showed him. Said, I need this gasket, and he won't give it to me. And he sat there and said, give him the gasket he wants. No, wait a minute. No, shut up and get in the parts. You give us what we tell you. You don't tell us what we get. So the union boy went back and parts guy went to his place, and we got the part we needed, put it on there and showed him. And he says, that better fit. And I said, come here and take a look. And I showed him, and he says, okay, we'll do that from now on. And because I was analytical, looked it over and had the chops to show him what was going on. There was a few other things I did, was able to do. Persistence, patience, that helps in quite a bit of it. But persistence can be a problem, and so can patience. If you're too patient, too persistent with something, you see, that's two different things, not necessarily. If you're too persistent, you're trying to do a job continuously over and over and over again, rather than sitting back, stopping, and being patient and analytical and figure out, why isn't this working? So you've got honesty, integrity, the knowledge that you're working on it, the technical acumen that you want to build on. Don't just sit there on your laurels and say, I went to Cobblesco for 2 years, but what was that for? Well, did you remember any of your electrical that now came in? Because I had an excellent electrical teacher, and he was a farmer that got trained at Cornell how to be an instructor in his 50s and 60s. By the time we got him, he was teaching physics level 2 at the college. And the guy who was trained for it with a doctorate sat there and says, because of his background on a farm, he can teach in ways that I could never do. So I got trained by that. And a decade or two later, here I am in the middle of a technical transition into engines with little solenoids on them, engines with electronic ignition systems on them. What was another one? Getting into cars with electronic ignition, electronic fuel injection, computer-controlled carburetors, and we're going into things that electronic dash. Later on, we're getting into anti-lock brakes and all of that, and learning the technical stuff, how it works. Then when you're plugging in your diagnostics, it has meaning. I had that little beeper box originally for the Ford EEC4 systems on the cars. Plug it in and you beep the thing out. Well, you're looking for one code, and there might be 5. Are they relevant? I learned early, write down the codes, erase the systems, check it again, and would come up with the code that I was looking for. And sometimes it'd be 2 codes, one causing the other, and I was already learning how to be analytical in the diagnostics and computer world. With simple, stupid stuff at home. So that was very good. But at the same time, when you get out into your career, you need to be a yes man to a particular point. And another one is that was a good point on my part, but at the same time was angered the egotistical managers is I tried to be careful when I was there asking certain questions. Did the customer say this, or this before I leave? Because most often they're going to turn to you and hope you have an idea what you want from the customer's description, take what you need and just go there. Well, the problem is all the shops, and I mean all of them, are underfunded and they're undertooled, and there's a problem with it. That take what you need. Well, the next guy might need it, and you're sitting there. If 1 or 2 questions is answered, you know what to take. So one guy says, you're like a dog on a bone. You want that answer. And I said, well, if you want it done the way you're hollering that you want it done, go there and get it done in as few trips as possible. If you don't ask the simple questions, then I've got a problem. Because you're going to yell at me, and you're already angry at me. And there's nothing I can do. There's a few simple things that I tried to teach some of the managers when they asked the questions, and 2 of them I demanded. I took work orders more than once and threw them back on the desk. I want full directions. I don't want you to send me out there 150 miles and then all of a sudden to figure out the last 30 miles on your own when there's no phone service, no Google, no MapQuest, no Yahoo Maps. And I'm working off Rand McNally and hoping. But even then, the job site moved around. So if you didn't have the specifics, and more than once I got sent out to a job site that had moved in the gas field and oil fields out here. Well, then what's the point? Find out where the machine is. A buddy of mine accentuated that one to a huge point, where finally we just got to the point where we went out and drove. And his point was, he drove out to a job site and he started laughing. I said, Kevin, you know exactly where it is today, don't you? Oh, yeah, we got it all written down here. We know where this puppy is. Mm-hmm. You too, huh? Yep, just like you did. We had a time where they gave me the wrong instructions, and I drove 15 to 20 miles and never was on a road. I was driving up and down a gas field pipeline that crossed roads. So I crossed 3 or 4 roads 3 or 4 times to finally get to the machine. So that's why we ask, trying to get those down, that the manager's angry that you do it, but at the same time, do you have the persistence enough when the patience to go through that so that you understand, A, where the machine is, what the customer's complaint is, and is there any other information that the operator offers? Occasionally, the owner is the operator, but most often he's not. So any information you get, and the other time is find out where the call came from. Did it come from the actual owner near the site at least? And in some cases, you can find out some information that just blow your mind that's important. An excavator that has auxiliaries and some other things attached to it, and you get out there and you know that when you get there, you already have an idea what you're searching for. It makes it so much easier on everybody when you just ask a few questions. Great. You got the model and serial number of your machine. What's the operator's complaint? And if it's not the operator giving the complaint, then you know that. You know, when you go out there and somebody says, ain't got no power, what's that mean? And just ask them, great, okay, engine power or digging power? I don't know. Well, then you know it's not the operator telling you. The operator will tell you if the engine's lugging or if it's just plain weak, just can't push. So those are things that are very important, especially excavators and hydrostatic drive units. It tells you whether it's on the hydraulic side or on the engine side. Most often it's the engine, yes. But all those little analytical questions that you ask beforehand and just, nope, just wondering if you got the information. The one guy sat there and told me one time, he says, I thought about it. And I started asking the customer a question, just like you wanted. And he says, you know what was funny? He says, I don't know. You know? Hang on. And he hollered out in the shop, got an answer, and said, okay, we know what it is. He said, great. That means you don't have to make 2 trips? No, we still have to make 2 trips, but I don't have to be there as long. I just have to go out, confirm what's going on, make sure there's nothing else, then come back, get the parts, and fix your machine. It should make things a lot easier. And you're thinking like I am, if you're a mechanic, technician, or anything else, yeah, especially in the fall, winter, and early spring, you're running around with fuel filters all over your truck and fuel treatment there too. And when you keep your inventory up when you're out on the road, that makes a difference. When you're in the shop and you're the guy that tells them when the inventory is low, you tell them what you need, what can make the job easier. It's one of those things that you end up being a bug to the manager, but at the same time, you save the shop a whole lot of hassle. And if you have a good manager that understands you're not there to be a bug, you're there to keep the system moving. I got time for that now. Okay, fine, walk away. And if the customer, if you got the patience and persistence, you'll say something later, but at the same time, just walk away, walk out the door, and then come out and sit there. Now, I can listen to you. Okay. Well, then tell them what you're talking about. Oh, well, I already knew that. Yeah, well, I didn't know that. And then they go back about their way. What happens? Any of the equipment that you use, tools that are a problem, you've noted them. They don't want to know, I know, but you have noted them. When somebody calls in and says, we need to borrow this tool, your manager isn't questioning anything else. It's 90% of the time it's, we loaned it out to another shop and it came back in this condition and we haven't had the money and the chance to repair it yet because our budget's low. Well, now he's talking budget. Now, suddenly the budget gets a little bigger sometimes. Well, who was the hero there? You'll never get credit for it, but you were the one that helped bring that across. So your honesty, your integrity, your willingness to learn, your willingness to continue learning and update yourself apart from the company itself. When you know you're working on a Komatsu and you know a Caterpillar's coming out with a hydraulic valve on their big excavators that's aluminum with chrome bores. And you know there's going to be a problem and you can take that back to the company and the salesman can have a field day with it. Suddenly you're not the bad guy on the planet. The other one is you're forthright and you're honest. You find out the salesman was given bogus information. You talk with him. Then he knows it. He tells the customer about it or checks it himself. So those are some of the things that help in our world. My boys are here. It's time for me to go. Catch you later.